Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Chris Winters, and welcome to the Paper Call Coaching Call. It is now March 28th. Can't believe it. We're almost into April already. It seemed like the new year just begun. But we're going to get started here today. We've got a lot of questions, and we've got a lot of good material to cover today. I want to start today's call sharing with you a story. It's a really interesting story, and in fact, it's based off of a new book that I'm reading. I'll tell you more about that later. But back in further back than that, back in 1882, a group of Rosettans, that was people from Rosetta, Italy, immigrated to the New World, as they called it at the time, which was New York. And the first ones to come over were 10 men and 1 boy. And they immediately sent word back to Italy that this was a great place. Get your butts over here, start the immigration process. And so they started that. There's just 11 that came over in 1882. Well, 12 years later, by 1894, over 1,200 Rosettans had immigrated to the U.S. And as it turns out, the first ones immigrated. They got to New York, and then they moved about 90 miles north into Pennsylvania. And they got some land, and they called it Rosetta land, and it was Rosetta, Pennsylvania. It's still in existence today. And very shortly, by the early 1900s, they had over 2,000 immigrants there. They were all working. They were all from the same village in Italy. And what was interesting about this group of immigrants is that around the 1960s, a U.S. physician was asked to speak at Rosetta, and he discovered while he was there speaking that the population there did not suffer any major heart attacks like the rest of the U.S. population in the 60s were. And so he's very interested in this, and he asked the town council of Rosetta if he could interview the people, study the people, discover the reason why people there were not dying of heart attacks. In addition to that, he also discovered while he was there that there was no suicides, there was no alcoholism, there was no drug addictions, and the crime was very, very little. And so basically these people here in this town in Pennsylvania who had immigrated from Italy were dying of old age. They weren't dying of other causes that the rest of the United States was at the time. So this doctor was very curious, and he wanted to study what was the cause. He wanted to get to the root cause. What was it? So naturally, the first thing he looked at was dietary practices. Said, okay, you guys must be, as a population, you must be eating something different. And as they quickly discovered, no, they were eating the same things that pretty much everyone else in America at the time was eating. And in fact, when he broke it down, he found out that 41% of the calories came from fat, and like bad fats, like lard fat, instead of something like olive oil, which they didn't have access to then, but was what they used to eat when they were in Italy. So their diets were the same as everybody else. So they threw out the dietary things. Okay, so these people are not dying of heart attacks because of dietary reasons. So if it wasn't dietary, then it must be genetic, right? So they started to look at the genetics of it in the 1960s. And how did they do that? They did it the best way that they could. And what they did is they looked at other people who were from the same gene line, the same geographic area in Italy, and had also immigrated to the United States around the same time, but just decided not to move to Rosetta, Pennsylvania. Instead, they decided, to immigrate and stay in New York and Manhattan and move to the Midwest. And they found that those people that didn't immigrate to Rosetta, Pennsylvania, but came from the same gene line, actually ended up dying just like the same percentage as they would across the United States. So they ruled out genetics. So it wasn't dietary, it wasn't genetics on here. And this is an actual, if you were to drive into Rosetta today, you would see this welcome sign as you drive in. So you drive into a city, it usually has a welcome sign on here. It says family values traditional since 1912. And what they really discovered when they really started looking at here, and what they concluded is how these people were just dying of natural causes, even though the fact that they were eating the same foods as the rest of the United States, they weren't dying of heart attacks. The drug addiction, the alcohol addictions, the crime rate, everything was lower. It was like, what is going on here? This city was an outliner. After looking at all the factors, they concluded that on here that what it was is it was their environment that they were in that was making all the difference, and still does till this day. And that their environment was more like everybody in the city was like an extended family. And there was a lot of interaction with the families in the neighborhoods, and people gave to each other, and it was a very warm and supporting community. And so the big takeaway here for me when I read about this was that I thought to myself, these are factors that I've been aware of, and these are also things that I want to instill in the community that you and I are in right now, which is the community of the Paper Call community. And I've been vocal about it before, and have expressed my opinions on it, that I really want to lead by example, and also create a community where we're giving and we're supporting each other. And when we do that, we're all going to rise together faster. And so one of the main messages here is that I really want you to be aware and appreciate the idea that the values of the world that we inhabit, whether it's this little cosmic world or this, paper call community, or your own physical world that you live in, that the people that you surround yourself with really have a much more profound effect on your lives than you may actually realize. And it affects who and what we can accomplish on here. And I want to further kind of sum that up with something that I learned from Bill Phillips years ago, and that is, what we surround ourselves with, we tend to become. Although that statement is obvious, I think to a lot of us it's like common sense, but a lot of us don't press that button every day. It's like, you are what you eat. Everyone agrees with that statement. You are what you eat. But a lot of us don't press that button every day and actually practice that. You are what you eat, because it does affect, even what you eat affects the way you think, feel, and interact with the world and what you think is possible. And even more so is your environment and who and what you surround yourselves. You tend to become that. Okay, you are what you eat, and you are what you surround yourselves with. I remember one of the first times I saw Bill Phillips speak, and when he spoke, he told this. He came out to the audience. They introduced him and everything. And he came out and he asked the audience. He asked the audience on here, and this was in Los Angeles. He asked them, and this whole topic was about health and living a better lifestyle. And he asked the audience on here by raise of hands, how many people in the audience have been to a bar? And basically the whole audience raised their hand. And then he asked, how many people in the room have, in that bar, or at any time you've been in a bar, had a beer or a drink? And pretty much the same people raised their hands. So it was pretty much the majority of the room. And then he asked, how many people have been to church? Just about the same amount of people also raised their hands. And then he asked them the kicker question, and this was the kind of the reality moment here. He said, how many people in this room who went to church drank a beer at church? And nobody raised their hand. And what he was trying to demonstrate is what I'm trying to demonstrate right now to you. And that is that the very same person will do two completely different things depending on the environment that they're in. And that's really what I want to share with you today before we get started in the questions on this end of it, is that your environment, it can support healthy behavior or it can support the opposite. So be very mindful of who you surround yourself with, and be aware that on a different level than maybe even like scientists are thinking about, thinking, okay, why does this little immigrant town in Pennsylvania, why are they not dying of heart attacks? Why is there not drug addiction? Why is there not alcoholism in the same percentage as the rest of the United States? What's going on here? And they tend to look at it from a point of dietary, genetics, when it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with Rosetta itself, the people within that community, and how they support each other. So you may not have the exact support that you want or need in your immediate environment. I encourage you to become acutely aware of it and make the necessary changes in order to do that. In our own community, which is what I have control of, I don't have control over your environment, but I do have control for the most part over this environment here. And some of you who are members of the forum and active in there has been some comments and some threads in there that have gotten out of hand, that are just not supporting what this environment is about. And it affects each and every one of us in a way a lot deeper than I think many people realize. So we'll be seeing some of those comments and those people removed from the forums. And these are things that maybe people, if there's people out there probably listening to the call right now or listening to the recording of this who are probably saying, oh, that was me. I was deleted from there. And your first response naturally would be to defend yourself, and I get that. But I would ask you to think beyond yourself and think about the community as a whole. And anytime that you're commenting or you're adding to the thread, or anytime that you're interacting with this community, remember that we're all one on here. We really are, whether you believe it or not, or if you can just at least wrap your mind around that concept for a little bit. We really are all one. And anytime that we put out there comments that are, for lack of better terms, just kind of negative energy that aren't adding to the benefit of others, whether you're asking a really good question that makes others think about it, and then they kind of reflect and have to defend their position, and they come back with a response that adds to the value and raises everybody up because we all rise together. That kind of stuff is good. People who want to share what's happening in their business, in their pay-per-call business, whether they're just feeling frustrated and they want to express it and get some support from others, that's great. We all feel that way. If you want to share some techniques or a new plug-in or something that you got, whatever it is, that helps raise the entire community, and it helps to encourage others to do the same thing, like the town in Rosetta, Pennsylvania, on that end of it. We'll all live longer because of it. We'll all have less heart attacks. We'll all lead a better life because of it. So aside from that, just a couple other points that I want to make on that, because it's so important on here, is the people. The people that we choose to share our time with are always, and if you really think about this, they're always influenced by the direction of our lives. And so we can't help but